This sunny day is 305 degrees, where it's always hot in here. I met Tupac Shakur's stepfather, Matula Shakur, when I was in USP Atlanta. And I remember when he came on the compound. As a matter of fact, he lived, his cell was right next to mine. And when somebody told me that that was in fact Matula Shakur, and I had remember reading all the books about the Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Army, because I wanted to join, I wanted to study that movement. And when he came to the compound and moved right next door to me, you know, I couldn't believe it, because, you know, I always studied how I could be a community activist and how I could give back to my community. So after dinner, he would go out and he would jog. And he would be running them laps, and to me, he felt like he was free. And so he would run. I would go on the rec yard, and I'd be kind of like following him around. And so when I noticed that he likes to jog, I started jogging behind him. And so I would jog behind Matula Shakur, and he would just be running, you know, with a pace like he was free. And I don't know how old he was, but I knew he was much older than me. He had, you know, gray beard, sort of like mine, and he had long dreads, dark skin. Looked built for his age. And so I got behind him, and I was pacing. So I don't know if he knew that I was behind him, so I made my schedule around his schedule. When I seen him put on his shoes and stuff, his tennis shoes, and grab his little bag, I know he was going to the yard. So he either did burpees, what we call burpees in prison, or he jogged. So his first thing he was doing was jogging. So like I said, I would get behind him and pace him. You know, I paced him that first day. So I'm just running behind him, kind of keeping up my distance from him, but I'm keeping up with him. So I don't know if he noticed me the first day, but I trotted behind him. And then maybe about the third or fourth time of me trailing behind him, he looked back. And I kept trailing behind him. And so I'm like, man, when is this man gonna stop running? I said in my mind. But I wanted to befriend him. So after he was running like 35 minutes, or like every 15 minutes, he would look back and I would be right there. So maybe about on the 7th time, he looked back and I'm pacing him and he smiled, gave a little chuckle, right? So I'm behind him, you know, and then he may run like, this man may run like an hour and a half. And so finally he understood that he had a running partner. So every time he go out there, I would be behind him. I would be behind him, and I would be behind him. No matter how long he ran, I would be behind him. And then we started having conversations. Then I befriended him. And so those guys that was in the Black Panther Party, Matula Shakur, Geronimo Pratt, and a lot of those guys, they was in the military. So those guys, they was real doctors in the military, for real. And so when Martin Luther King got killed. A lot of those men like Mutulu Shakur, Geronimo Pratt, and others, they came out of prison and they started getting involved with activist work. And so I read about Mutulu Shakur being in the Black Panther Party. I read about him being in the Black Liberation Army. And so I had already knew a lot of that history. And so he would sit down and he would talk to me. And he would talk to me about how the Black Panther Party had a group of men that he called that worked above ground. So they were the ones in charge with the free lunch and the free clinic. They was the ones that rode around behind the police car to make sure that they didn't abuse the citizens. And they ran the clinics. And then they had an underground army with Mutulu Shakur and others. And what they would do, they would go out and they robbed banks. And they went out on assignments. And according to him, they would take all the money to fund the medical clinics and the free lunch programs and all the elderly programs that they have for the people in the streets. So they robbed and stuff to provide monies to take care of the community. And so I remember one time I went into his room and he had needles stuck all in his arms and like maybe about 15 needles stuck on different parts of his body. So when I walked in and opened the door, when I seen the needles, I closed the door and backed out because I never seen that before. I didn't know if he was shooting drugs. I didn't know what he was doing. So he politely said, "Come on in, brother." So he explained to me that he was a doctor. He used to do acupuncture. Acupuncture where they put all the different little needles in different part of your body and different part of your nerve endings and it meditates you. So I learned that about him. He also showed me pictures where Tupac was sitting on his lap. Tupac maybe was like 5 or 6 years old, sitting on his lap. And then he showed me a lot of different paperwork where they was hitting armored cars. And he was showing me with large sums of money. Say, look at this, look at this, look at this. He was showing me the paperwork. And that's what he explained to me what they were using the money for. And so I befriended him. I began preparing his meals for him, you know, and then I went under his tutelage as a mentor. And he taught us hand-to-hand combat. He told us what books to read. He was kind of upset with the rappers because they would rap about John Gotti and rap about drug kingpins when they had their own heroes that they could have rapped about. And out of so many things that I remember about him, I remember that day when we were all sitting in the TV room and the news flashed that Tupac had just got killed. And he jumped up, he was mad. He said, "I told him don't mess with that nigga Suge. I told him, he wouldn't listen." So yeah, I had an opportunity to befriend Dr. Mutulu Shakur. Peace.